What's going on, advocates? Welcome back to another edition of Equity with your host, myself, Reginald A. Howard. I think I like that theme. I was trying, I've been trying to think of a new way since we made the transition of going in a new direction with the pod and with the broadcast. Actually, I've been studying the broadcasters. If you want to know some of the things I'm doing to advance the conversation. But again, as always, thank you to everybody that, like, subscribe, support, and all of those different things that you do to make this podcast continue to go. It doesn't go unnoticed and it definitely doesn't go unappreciated. I hope that you all enjoyed the episode with me and my friends. I feel like I'm talking robotic at this point, but I hope that you all enjoyed the episode with me and my friends last week. I got some great feedback on it, as far as the conversation and the flow and things of that nature. And of course, them not really, I'm used to this by now. Like, I can talk to people in podcast form, like the cameras are not even recording. So I just appreciate them being open and honest and being able to share and have conversation. Of course, they don't do it often, so they may not be as willing. The real podcast happen when we stop recording and getting into detail about certain things. But again, I just appreciate anything that they do and contributing and helping in that, because it definitely does help out a lot. But being is that I wanted to do a continuation of last week's conversation where my friend, bro, he and again, I know this is a tough topic and is one that I've touched on in the past, and had conversations about in the past, but I wanted to go back into it because, bro, if you didn't listen to episode 124, my friend bro dropped a bombshell basically talking about him being robbed. And again, when we went off air, he was able to tell me a little bit more about what happened, how it happened, and going into detail. And I didn't really want to press him and ask him about that. I'm sure we'll revisit it. Um, I'm sure we'll revisit it in the near future on a later episode once he has the chance to, like, process everything. But that was literally on the podcast, was my first time hearing it. He didn't even share that with me. And of course it was happening in real time. It had happened the night before. And even still, him able to come on the podcast and even share like right after something traumatic like that happens. Is one that I'm always grateful for, because he didn't have to share that. And I know it's a lot of people that go through that. And the reason why I wanted to do a continuation of that episode is because, as the time of this recording is right after July 4th weekend, and supposedly, according to CNN and all the news articles, I want to make sure I'm quoting correctly, but CNN is, I mean, 4th of July weekend is one of the most dangerous weekends when it comes to gun violence within the world, in the country. Um, but before I move off of that, man, just in going into that, just hearing my brother's story and hearing how, again, I spent that whole episode sharing about how he's very solution oriented, straight to the point. He doesn't do too much like dwelling on like what we need to do, how we gonna solve this, what's gonna happen. It is more of like action oriented, and to see that he had to act real time and dealing with the robbery was one to just, I don't want to say ponder on, but really like take it back and see how he will respond. And he even said that because of his personal past experiences, he responded in a way that he probably should have like sought therapy or have some conversation with someone and process the thoughts behind it. Because that's not, and again, it's a normalized behavior, but it's not something that everyone should normalize. You should have take some time out. Even him saying that, it just it started to make me go through all the times where like robbery and armed robbery and violence is just normalized, and there's a lot of people speaking about it, a lot of people having those conversations. But I even start to think about things in my personal life where I was a assistant accomplished to armed robbery. And I've spoken on that story before, but I'm even thinking about, like, even when I go talk to kids in school and have conversations about gun violence, I tell them about, like, my earliest interaction or introduction. I had two introductions. Well, two entry points. I won't say two introductions, two entry points to gun violence. The first time I held a gun was when I was like 5 to 7 years old. Actually, I think I talked about it on a podcast. Ah, man, I wish I could go back to the episode. See, this is how you know things happen real time. But I think I talked to my stepfather. Shout out to Kevin. Um, about when I found, and that was a long ago. That's probably like episode 26. I was able to have a conversation with him. And I told him that I found a gun in our house. And that was the first time I had to be maybe about 6, 7. And I found a gun. I remember it to this day. It was silver, it was all metal. Had like I think a black, I don't know, it's starting to be a little vague now because I'm in my 30s, but I had it when I was like 7. But I found it under the couch, in between the cushions. And that's when that's how accidental things happen. So that me being I before I would say I was nosy, but now knowing the better language and having better language, I was just curious. When you just go searching around, I didn't know the gun was there. I think I was probably searching for like candy or coins or something like that, and I found it in between the couch. Um, and that was my first entry point of holding a gun and having a gun. And I think I said it to him when he came on the podcast and he was talking about it, or when we were discussing it. He was like, "I didn't even know you found that gun." And that it should speak to like gun safety and like having guns in the household. Like my household have guns in there. My kids, of course, know we have guns. They don't know where they're located at, but they know, they are aware that they existed within the household. Me and the wife try to not keep the bullets next to the gun. And we keep them in separate places, so just in case a kid does find one or the other, they're not in reach of like harming themselves if together. So and I think that that should be like a requirement when you giving gun safety to like families and letting them know, like keep them in separate places, which I also had a contradiction to that, because if someone was to come in my house right now or coming to where I reside, um I wouldn't want those to be in two separate places. You want to have easy access to them because you wouldn't want them to go in separate spaces. But I digress. So speaking of my stepfather, I was talking about the story having that was my first entry point. Excuse me. And my second entry point happened a little bit older, when I was around middle school. And I went to a corner store, or not in a corner store. Well, it was a corner store, but I went to a corner store, and it was a corner store that I had been stealing from. Like, I can be honest from it. I was stealing from often, and stealing from every day, going to the store, I would pay for like 80% of things, but like still like 20 to 30% of things. Um well, that math didn't math, but so I was stealing from him, and I think the store owner knew. I think the store owner knew. Um and one day I came into the store, and I was doing my regular routine, and I remember he pulled the gun out and put it on the counter and was like, "Hey, listen, I know that you're stealing. If you come in here again, yeah, this is gonna be for you." And he put the gun on the counter. And I ran out of that store so fast. I ran out of that store so fast. And um but in looking back on both stories, I think there should have been some. I should have approached my parents, and I see why kids don't, because they probably scared that they get in trouble for fouling that. But someone's better safe than sorry. That's why I think I wanted to go. Me and the wife wanted to go the front approach to let our kids know, and more so my 10-year-old son than the 5-year-old. letting them know that it is guns in the house so they can be aware. And I don't even know if my 10-year-old still remembers that there's guns in the house because that was when we first got them. Um, but I think I should have had a conversation with my mom and my stepfather because I think when I brought that story up to my mom, she didn't even know that the gun was in the house. For one, and then the other thing, when the corner store one, that store owner should have been arrested. He should have had some type of like charge against him, some type of like something with a minor because I don't think that's how you properly react to it. He could have pulled me to the side, said something to the source, but that wasn't the proper reaction because if a kid, even if my son was still a kid's gonna be kids, I wouldn't want any store owner or anybody to pull a gun out and try to scare them that like to the least. And the sad part of it is it's a true reality. Um, and it's one that a lot of kids face growing up in certain environments that they may um they my introduction to guns and my son's introduction to guns could have two different endings. And not saying mine was right, but I think it could lead to more promising things happening with gun safety than the other way. Another story I'll share is my other another entry point, and there's so many times that you know uh guns is just around you that you can harm yourself and things of that nature. I think I spoke on the first episode about armed robbery um that I had been a part of, so I won't go into too much detail about that. And then I've been advised not to share as much of that story because other people could get in trouble about it. Maybe if um somebody else comes on, I'll share it. But during that time, well, I'll share this. I always tell my wife that if someone came and tried to like rob us or wanted to harm us in any capacity, that I will understand. And she could never understand how I would understand. And the reason why I understood was I remember when I started, trying to find myself and I started committing armed robbery. And again, when I spoke on the other story that I won't speak here today because I've spoken on it plenty of times before, I wasn't aware of all the charges or all the different implications that I was putting myself in and all the different ways that I could have, got myself into trouble. And so, me, I lost my train of thought. Hold on, I'm gonna get it back. Um, Mm, oh, my wife. So I was telling her, yeah, if someone was to come in here and rob us, that I wouldn't feel any type of way because I understand it. And the reason why I understand it is because um when I was in that space of finding myself, I remember we had pulled up on this one guy. And he was basically like a construction worker. He was going to work or whatever the case may be. Got out. Um, I think he probably was like around the age I am now. So I have empathy because I understand that these young boys is trying to like do what they gotta do. And he had fake money on him, he had fake jewelry on him, and all of these different things. And the reason why I shared that as a note of the story is because when we were more mad at the fact that we were robbing him and he had fake things on him than the fact that we were robbing in certain like it wasn't ours in the first place, but we were still upset about it. And that's how you know we were so young and naive and didn't know the consequences and circumstances and the severity of the situation that we were in because we didn't even realize that for one, we weren't the best robbers because we obviously was robbing somebody who didn't have the things that we were looking for. And for two, it just wasn't the thing that we were supposed to be doing. So I bring that up to say, going back to as an adult, if someone was to come in here and, rob me or have those conversations, just like my friend talked about in the last episode, I'm glad he just gave it up. He didn't fight for it. He didn't do anything. My wife was like, yo, I'll be mad. I work hard. I get these things. And what I always try to explain to her is that we can afford to like get some more of these different things. We're fortunate and blessed. But if we don't have life and we fight and we be mad or da 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 da, it is what it is. And I understand. So she may be emotional about that. So I understand she has the right to, but we don't have to fight for those certain things. And so again, I relate that to that story, and I relate that to just gun violence and how I'm not gonna lie, I'm in a weird place with gun violence right now, and really processing it and trying to figure it out. And the reason why I bring that up is, and let me make sure that I said everything that I wanted to say on that. Before I move on into that, it has become so. Oh, and I guess it's the perfect transition because it has become so normalized that um, it doesn't even it doesn't even affect. I feel like it's never going anywhere. I feel like it's never going anywhere. I feel like it's gonna always be here. Um, until it has the proper classification of the severity of what's going on, it will always be around. And what I mean by that, which if we have time, we'll get into later. I don't think it's taken as serious as it should be. Um, and so me knowing that it's not taken as serious as it should be, it leads me to believe that it's one of those things we have to accept as a natural part of life, even if we're unwilling to, because everyone is like, um, if it's not happening in your front yard, you don't see it as a problem, and I think that's probably why it's going to continue to run rampant in the way that it does. But the reason why I shared that is on another story that I got before I move into this next piece of what I wanted to talk about. Um, I had a friend who had a family member, and again, I'm trying to be respectful of the individual situation. I had a friend who had a family member that just had a baby, um, and they live, of course, in an impoverished community, and they just had a baby, and the baby was born maybe in February, January, earlier this year, and the family member had to move with my friend because the day that the baby was born, someone got shot outside of their house. And they were a younger kid. The family member was a younger kid. Let's use it like so Bob. I'll use the Bob. So Bob's family member just had a baby. And they had to move the family member had to move in with Bob because the day the baby was born, the it was gun violence outside their house. Someone got shot. And Bob was like, "Man, I don't it's nothing I can do for them because I they can't live with me. Like I love them, but they can't live with me. But I can only imagine that, excuse me, that individual who has to deal with that and knowing that they live with the circumstances that they can't control. They barely want to live in the circumstances that they live in. Then they bring in a child in there, and then Bob as a family member as support um can't support them but don't want to see them get harmed outside of that. It's a vicious cycle that I don't think there's a lot of people like addressing it. And yeah, there's a lot of organizations out there doing great work. I actually was a part of it with Black Men Hill and doing gun violence group therapy, but even going into the school and talking to the kids, sometimes I used to just feel like when we went to those schools and had those conversations that I don't know, like I remember I'll use instance, and I don't know if I spoke on this before, but I remember this one instance where I was in school as probably elementary school, and the DARE program came into the school and was telling us about like drugs, alcohol, or just drugs. I think it was just smoking cigarettes. So that was the main focus. Like, don't smoke. It can cause cancer, all these different bad things, right? And so I remember like, man, I'm never gonna smoke. I'm not gonna have that. That was I don't want to say great presentation, but that was a life changing presentation where it made me say, you know what, I may never go out and smoke. And so after school was over, got the pamphlets, taking it home to my mom. I see the instructors outside smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, they did a whole presentation telling me not to smoke, or telling the school not to smoke, but then you're outside smoking. So you can imagine the impression that made on my little brain, um, seeing that, like, I would ask, I didn't know that, again, that terminology at the time, but that's hypocritical. If they said it was so bad, why are they doing it? And so as an adult, I understand it. Like, life has stressors, and we all have different ways of coping and mechanisms to heal or find resolute. But I think that with gun violence, it's sort of the same thing. Like, I know a lot of gun violence circumstances. I was just watching something the other day where, um, even with like gang members, it's hard for you to end gang violence or just violence in general when you lost a loved one. And so some things may pre-generate you where your family are at wars. This has been since movies with mafia and all these different things. There's blood. Once blood is shed, it's hard. And I can't even say I'm not, if somebody do something to my brother or somebody do something that I love, that I'm just about to be like, no, I'm gonna turn the other cheek. And so with all that being said, I feel like there's like a never ending circle. And when going back to the school with Black Men Help with Gun Violence Group Therapy, I remember going into those schools, talking to those kids, and we, as much as we were providing prevention resources, that was great in the idealistic world. I noticed the environment that they come through. And I remember this one kid question, it was me and another instructor who've been on this platform before, Edie, as a therapist, and he was like, well, what makes y'all different than any other organization that comes out here and has conversation with us? And it was a very valid question of, we understand these resources, we understand all the things that y'all are saying, we get it, but we still gotta go out here and live life. Like, we still gotta go out here and survive. We still gotta go out here and like walk these streets and walk home and go to the store and wash our clothes and shop and get groceries. So everything you say sound cute on the board, but I gotta live. And I think that's one of the reasons of like, this makes sense. So what can I do in this short amount of time to have these conversations? And I get it. Like, I don't want to put it in a downplaying moment of like, I don't want to have this what do you call that, pessimistic thinking where it'll always be like this, it'll forever be like this. But I do say that I have to find a different approach that's more effective, because the approach that I'm utilizing right now is not making me feel, I don't want to say validated, but it's not making me feel like it's doing the job I'm thinking it's doing. It's a drop in the bucket, as opposed to um like really like turning the faucet on. And I saw this clip. Let me see if I can pull it up. I saw this clip that they talk about rap music causing violence, and I want to play it. Hold on one second. Um and again, I wasn't intending to have this conversation today, but just having those, oh, it wasn't a clip, it was a picture. So if you don't hurt nobody now, it's a story with John Morant, the basketball player, and long story short, he's been caught multiple times with a firearm, for lack of better words. He was on Instagram Live in the club, and he had a gun, waving a gun within the camera while he was in the club. And then more recently, he was in a car, waving a gun again, listening to rap music. And uh it ultimately led to him being suspended and having to losing money. I think it was close to like 80 million, 40 to 80. It was more than two figures of millions, and that's a lot of money. And so I saw this uh meme that came up, and it says, Let me see what it says for those. The tweet goes viral speaking on how music could possibly be influencing people. Do they have a point? And so what the tweet says is, if rap music got a 23-year-old, $200 million man ready to lose it all, what do you think it's doing to these kids that have nothing? And I always have a, what do you call that? A gift and a curse relationship when it comes to rap music, because for one, it's one of when it comes to the black community, it's one of our oils, our natural oils that if the market or just the world or if people like you, then you can make a resource out of nothing, out of thin air, that can change your family life. So I never want to disrespect our oil, because we weren't fortunate enough to be able to dig oil mines and be able to go in the ground and receive that type of money early on in our generations. And so I have that relationship with music. Also, my other relationship with music is I was a big 50 Cent fan growing up. He got shot 9 times, and his whole beef with the other rapper Ja Rule was almost the highlight of my childhood. They look so cool with the bulletproof vest on, and the way he came on in the club upside down. Like, that was one of my biggest, and still is. I ain't gonna say one of my, still is my biggest inspiration. And the reason why I say he still is my biggest inspiration is, look at the transformation of what he's done from where he came from, and how much that shows young men that it shows the growth and the maturity of, you can come from these circumstances and achieve this. And that's all due to hip hop. That was his main source of like changing his trajectory. I just got done reading his book and he was talking about it, and I grew so much even more respect for him, hearing him share his vulnerability, share his insecurity, share all those different things that I didn't even think he experienced, because you see him as that hard, bulletproof vest, shot 9 times guy. And so I share that. I want to go back to that tweet. And again, it says, if rap music got a 23-year-old, $200 million man ready to lose it all, what you think is doing to these kids that have nothing? And so I want to pause and on that, and I learned, again, this is a primarily based mental health platform. I want to go back to something that I learned about more recently, and it was called, and I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly, biopsychosocial approach. And want to bring biopsychosocial approach, and again, it's a fairly new term that I just learned. Um, and it was an article written by Katrina Repper. Shout out to you. And it talked about this approach. It says, while Western medicine uses a biomedical approach to health, health psychologists prefer to evaluate health through a biopsychosocial lens. Quite simply, this approach includes the influences of biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors when looking at overall health. The biopsychosocial approach focuses on the biology or the physiology underlying health, the psychology of the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors influencing health, and the ways that the society and the culture all influence health. The biopsychosocial approach allows us to see how health changes, not only biologically, but how your inner thoughts and feelings in the society around you influences your perception and determination of health. So what does that all mean? Basically, your genetics can play a part, the things that surround you can play a part, and then you start getting into the actual medical portion of, like, the influences on your health, but not just only focusing on the medical part. So it says, so what is the biggest difference between a biomedical approach and a biopsychosocial approach? Well, when we break it apart, it comes down to cells versus societal influences. The biomedical approach takes health from The biomedical approach takes health from a purely biological perspective. If this cell does this, then this is what happens to the body. That's plain and simple. You know, like you got blood in your veins, heart pumping blood. Like we have a system in our body that makes our body function and allows us to do what we do. But take a step back. Is that really how health works? The biopsychosocial approach suggests that there is more. In 1977, George Engel argued that well-being includes the effects of the psychological, behavioral, and social dimensions. His biopsychosocial approach advocates for the necessity of treating and thinking about illness by including the social and behavioral factors that play a role in overall health. I, for example, poor eating habits and obesity, smoking, stress, anxiety, depression. So, making a simple example, and we talked about smoking earlier. Here's an example of how a biopsychosocial approach differs from a purely biomedical perspective. So smoking, the biomedical approach will be analyzing smokers from the biological perspective and reasons for smoking, which include addiction or hereditary. However, we can see from a psychosocial approach that there are many reasons that people start smoking, and they are not necessarily from a biological origin. So people will say you got it inherited to you by your mother or your father, or your genetics is just prone to like start smoking as a result, which can be true. But it may not be the only way. So the biopsychosocial approach, people may start smoking for psychological reasons, such as thinking it makes them less stressed, or because a personality trait. Extroverts are more likely to smoke. People may start smoking due to social networks or perceived cultural norms. Finally, we still must note that addictions and heritable are biological components that can contribute to smoking behavior. So, and a long story short, it's just a different approach of trying to identify those different behaviors. Because I see people look at someone like John Morant and it's like, how can this happen? But there probably are other issues that we're not considering. And he said it multiple times of like, no one understands the stress that I'm under, especially being worth that much money. And again, I don't like that one person speaks for everyone, but he is a microcosm of like, all right, why do kids or why do younger people resort to violence as a means, or gun violence as a means to harm whatever they're going to. I don't even want to say harm. Why do people resort to gun violence? And it again, those different approaches help me understand like, hey, it ain't all perfect. It ain't all easy breezy. It ain't just one thing or another. There are multiple factors. And to that point, it brings me up to my earlier example of this is why I think it's a never ending game, because the amount of support that individuals need to get the help and support that they need to be, balanced, is going to take a generational approach to solving that problem. And I don't think we would have to treat it the way we treated COVID-19 to really, solve that problem. And I don't think everyone is treating it as that issue. And what the last thing I'll speak on gun violence, before we, get into anything else. And it was an article before I move on. Um, it was talking about, and I wanted to give you all that feedback of the psychosocial approach, because I think of I think of gun violence as a disease, and I think we don't treat it that way, right? And I was doing mad research trying to figure out, all right, how can I start to like make this case a lot more louder? Because I'm sure there are other people who probably feel the same way, but I think once it's presented as a disease, it can start to get the treatment and the help and the support that we're looking for. So, mind you, I talked about the biopsychosocial approach. Gun violence is a complex biopsychosocial disease, and as such requires a multidisciplinary approach to understanding and treatment. And this is from what's this? The National Institute or the National Library of Medicine under the National Center of Biotechnology Information. Shout out to you all. Framing gun violence as a disease places it firmly within medical and public health practice. I think when you isolate those things or these terminology and you put gun violence and it has a lost home of support, that's a good part. If it has a lost home of support, then it will never be able to get treated effectively. Like we know where, for lack of a better term, cancer needs to be treated. We know where AIDS needs to be treated. We know what house it lived in, but sometimes, gun violence get moves from different departments of issues wanting it. And I spoke to someone that has been a gun violence advocate for a long time doing buybacks and prevention and education and all these different things. And he said it's because of wherever the money flows. And once the money gets taken out and it goes into different avenues, like right now, mental health is big. And so all the money and resources and information support is going into the mental health realm. And so if gun violence gets phrased as a mental health issue, then it'll get supported. But if it gets phrased as like a few years ago was prison reform was the big thing in society, if we're treating it as a prison reform issue, it wouldn't get the amount of support it would get as a mental health issue right now, because mental health is one of the, I want to say, for lack a better word, like trendy topics right now. And so it says framing gun violence as a disease. We read that. By applying the disease model to gun violence, it is possible to explore the host, the agent, and environment in which gun violence occurs and to identify risk factors to target for prevention. This approach also provides an opportunity to address scientifically inaccurate assumptions about gun violence. In addition, there are many opportunities for medical communities to treat gun violence as a disease by considering and treating the biologic, behavioral, and social aspects of this disease. The medical community must answer recent calls to engage in gun violence prevention, and employing this model of gun violence as a biopsychosocial disease provide a framework for engagement. So I want to skim through some of this because I won't bore you, but I'll make sure to include it for those who want to, read the whole article. So they compared it to HIV, which is considered a disease. In much the same way that human HIV rates grew unchecked until we began to acknowledge that it was a biopsychosocial disease that could be prevented and controlled, and scientifically we moved past the social stigmas of a disease first recognized as largely affecting the homosexual men, gun violence will continue unchecked until we invest in research to discover effective means to reduce it. To fully engage physicians and other sectors of the healthcare community, we need to frame gun violence as a biopsychosocial disease. We know gun violence follows predictable patterns just like infectious diseases and other illnesses. For example, young African American males are at increased risk of firearm related homicides, while older white males are at increased risk for firearm related suicide. Through an understanding of the risk factors for a disease, we can identify means of control and prevention. And that's what I mean by, like, we have to start framing it differently, because it'll be treated differently if we in even putting it in the lab and scientific and getting and that's where I want to be at, if I'm being honest. Because I can go and talk to kids, I can have these conversations, but I think there is a lot of work that needs to be presented in position properly to really get the solutions that we looking for, because we can talk. I don't think, I always say the people, I don't really believe in gun buybacks, and I know how much guns they get off the street, so I don't want to say that they don't work. But what I will say is that I feel awkward giving my gun up knowing that the killers are not giving theirs up. And the people that's perpetuators of gun violence, they're not giving their guns up. They're not going to the gun buybacks. And so it puts you in an awkward position where they're doing work, but it's also like, am I doing myself an injustice when I'm giving up my means of protection? So going back to the article, and again, I want to make sure I pick out the bits and pieces that are relevant. Oh, it's all relevant. But pick out the ones that stuck out to me. Um, By framing gun violence as a biopsychosocial disease, it engages the healthcare community of physicians and nurses, complements the necessary multidisciplinary approach to advance our scientific understanding, and it informs the host, agent, vector, and environmentally focused interventions beyond the immediate biology of fractures, bleeding, and edema. This is critically important since preventing and controlling gun violence will not occur to any significant degree until we begin to approach it in a manner similar to controlling other biopsychosocial diseases such as HIV. One immediate benefit of framing gun violence as a disease is the opportunity to address the misleading, limited statements as a scientifically inaccurate, yet repeatedly over and over again. So it's a lot of information that goes out to the community if it's not presented right. Um, that if you get it in a scientific way and put it the science behind it, then you can kind of get rid of some of those lingering informations out there that people may be utilizing and repeating and regurgitating, but it may not be true. And so that's why it's important to probably have that science to back it up. And that's why I love what I do now. Um, I think I did a lot of practice. I keep saying I did a lot of practice, but having this theory behind the practice is helping out a lot because now I'm able to put that information behind what I'm trying to say. I was talking about gun violence being a disease for probably like if not 2 years, the last year, having that conversation. And now that I'm starting to get these, data points behind it, I think I can get it. I think I can do a good job within the community. We'll revisit this. Excuse me. There are many opportunities for medical communities to treat gun violence as a biopsychosocial disease. Increasingly, trauma center are recruiting clinical psychologists to provide behavioral health interventions that complement the surgical team's emphasis on biology. Shout out to Healing Hurt People at the Drexel community of nonviolence and prevention and justice. I think that's what it's called. While the integration of behavioral health specialists is occurring within centers where the disease is more likely to be treated, the majority of centers are not yet advancing care with the integrated approach. Behavioral/social interventions include hospital-based violence prevention programs where the focus is to address the social and behavioral issues of gun violence and to prevent recidivism. In some instances, primary care physicians are trained in assessing exposure to trauma to understand the social context of the patient's health. They can provide recommendations for psychological care if the stress is evident. While these examples exist with healthcare, unfortunately, they are not the norm. To move disease prevention forward, significant development of an integrated multidisciplinary program is needed. Additionally, more research is needed in the inpatient setting of trauma centers to better understand the psychosocial elements of the disease to maximize outcome and to reduce recidivism. Basically, I sum that up to say that I'll sum that and what I read was that the hospitals are just treating most hospitals and they're trying to integrate it, but they are already overwhelmed from the effects from COVID, and which before they were already overwhelmed. But they're treating, if you come with a gunshot, they're treating the room, patching you up, and sending you home. Just because the mere fact that we have a lot of patients that are getting gunshots. We don't even have the capacity to sit down and really understand the problems that are happening within the victims. Which, as much as one can understand, are we doing more harm than good? Because if you solve I think we're putting band-aid solutions on problems that if you solve the leaky faucet with like welding and really solving the hole in the pipe, as opposed to like, all right, we're gonna keep mopping up the water, you really do yourself an injustice because you're going to keep having more and more people. And then you get into this whole game of like, well, maybe you want more people because that's better for the hospital, or you have patients. It's a whole nasty game out here, y'all. And I'm learning it as I go along the way. And as I learn, I provide the information back to the people that I've been learning this journey with. But it's just wild when you start to get behind and learning it. The importance of this framing distinction can be more easily seen when we consider prior and ongoing work to reduce the burden of injuries from car crashes. We have achieved considerable success in the application of the disease model, which has resulted in significant reductions in death and disability over the past 50 years, which is understandable. When you put the seatbelt on, you save yourself from dying, going through a window, the airbag, all of that stuff. Evidence-based policies such as seatbelt laws and significantly improved car and road designs that, oh, I don't know that word, control the energy of exchange with passengers and driver. All components of the disease model have been systematically investigated in advance. All right. So I want to skip through some of this. Let's skip through that. Yeah, we have not taken a step back and using. I think this is good. As a society, we have achieved success in controlling infectious disease with a focused disease model approach, and we have successfully expanded the use of the disease model to prevent and control non-communicable diseases such as cancer and heart disease. We have used this approach for other challenging biopsychosocial diseases, burnings, such as smoking and alcohol abuse. Further, it was only once we blunted the political stigma stunning our progress in combating HIV that the most significant discoveries took place and lived where we saved. I don't see as much cigarettes commercials as I used to see. I remember AIDS being rampant when I was growing up, and I'm sure individuals still have AIDS, but I think AIDS is treated a lot. HIV, I only say AIDS because I think that's not correct. HIV is treated a lot differently than it was treated in the 90s and the early 2000s. Even the commercials that I see, people are still living healthy and happy lives. But I think they got a control on the framing of it. And I think once you get control, when I say they, I mean political figures, I mean healthcare facilities, I mean like everybody. It was a collective and collaborative effort on getting this I don't even call it disease because it sounds disrespectful. When I call disease for gun violence, it's because I want to bring severity, but disease or the medical, I don't know what the medical terminology for it is, but when you treat HIV as the way it is, I think it reframed the way the society interacted it. Yet we have not taken a step back in using the disease model to prevent and control gun violence, in the part due to the relative lack of funding. I just spoke on that earlier, and excuse me, and therefore the relative lack of investigation. Framing gun violence as a disease places it firmly within medical and public health practice. Interventions across multiple sectors informed by comprehensive linked data and rigorous, adequately funded research can be used to prevent injuries, improve acute care and rehabilitation, inform and evaluate program and policy interventions. These can ultimately reduce morbidity and mortality. Um, all right, let me see if I want to use this last one. Specific, maturing to a child action. No. Recent calls of issues, one of the largest health systems approved the 2 million experiment. See, that's so in the last part of this article, it says recent calls to engage the physician and public health communities in addressing gun violence must be answered by the medical community. One of the largest health systems in the U.S. has recently approved a $2 million expenditure to study gun violence prevention. By framing gun violence as a psychosocial disease, we can move beyond acrimony and fear and use the tools that have been owned over the years, over centuries, to advance science and prevent and control this disease burden and adversely impacts our patient families and communities across the U.S. and the world. Um, Shout out, who wrote that? Stephen W. All these MDs. Shout out to you all who wrote this. That was a well put. And again, it was something that I was feeling for a long time, but them being able to put the theories and all of the things behind that information, I hope we continue to frame it as such. This was published in 2018. I feel like I'm gonna write one of these one day. As the more information I gain, the more knowledge I gain, I think I'll be able to put a piece together once I learn how they all get to do this. I think that's dope. But yes, Last but not least, the reason that sparked all this, of course, I said it sparked it from the last conversation um with my friend bro, but the other thing that sparked this was over the weekend. There was a mass shooting in Philadelphia uh where it says suspect in a mass shooting that left 5 dead fired randomly at victims, police say. A shooter wearing a bulletproof vest and a ski mask fired randomly at vehicles and pedestrians Monday night in Southwest Philadelphia, killing 5 people and wounding 2 others. Um, the police commissioner Denise Outlaw told reporters that the armed and armored assailant was firing seemingly at random people, including a mother driving her twins home in the Concessing neighborhood. What happened last night was unimaginably disgusting and horrifying. All right, that was the rest of the article. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss nothing. So that shooting happened around my children's grandmother's house, and they could have been a part of that. And they said the individual was shooting randomly, so it could have randomly happened. My friend, to bring it back to the beginning of this conversation, was randomly walking down the street and got robbed. This is why I say I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think we have to live with it. And so I'm now trying to reframe my relationship with the solution to gun violence. And you may hear me ask individuals. I've spent a year probably asking therapists their thoughts on it, or anybody I can talk to. But I think now, as opposed to therapists, I think I want to talk to the health practitioners, the medical community. And I know mental health, the therapists are in that, but I think there are other angles and other individuals with expertise who can have these conversations in a way where we're gonna get to the bottom of this. I think I can talk my way into a solution. And that's not to minimize the individuals, rest in peace, who lost their lives over the weekend, over the 4th of July weekend, but I think there's more that we can do. I think everybody has to play their part. Shout out to the foot soldiers and the grassroots organizations who are out there in the combat, in the field, and really dealing with the ramifications of such a horrific um thing that's plagued for lack of a better term, the Black community. And when you get numb to it after a while, you get so numb. I think that we become numb when we don't have any feelings towards it. And that's not okay because lives are attached to those feelings. And until it land on your doorstep, you won't know how it feels for it to impact you. And it's knocked on my door from me being a contributor, and it also knocked on my door as people around me affected. And that's not to say that I can't be affected, because I'm sure there are a bunch of times that I came close to being affected, but I just consider myself lucky because it ain't promised. But that's I think I'm gonna leave it there. I know this wasn't like a usual conversation. I'll say to end on a high note, to end on a high note, uh, I feel like I learned something new with this biopsychosocial thing, and I think I'm going to dive into it a lot more deeply, which should result in some type of results. So we'll revisit this in the future. I appreciate you all for listening, taking the time out, and considering my podcast as something to be a part of your rotation of listening pleasure. Please make sure to go leave a comment on Apple or wherever you're listening. Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Google Podcasts, whatever you're listening, it helps out a lot. And I still haven't found out a way to end this, but we'll get it soon. I appreciate you. We'll see you next conversation. Peace.